Growing our muscles is a very complex process that is very important to understand. But there's so much information on the internet. So in this video, we will try to answer all the questions and understand what types of hypertrophy there are, what types of muscle fibers there are, and what types of training we can use to engage different types of muscles. It's going to be very interesting and informative. Every athlete should know this. Let's get started. By the way, be sure to subscribe to our channel and click on the bell, and don't miss out on any of our new videos. Hypertrophy is an increase in the size of any tissue or organ of the human body. However, in this topic, we are primarily interested in the hypertrophy of muscle tissue. People often talk about fast and slow muscle fibers, about hypertrophy of sarcoplasm or mitochondria, and there's lots of confusion. How do you make sense of it all? How muscles work. Muscles are a certain case of dense connective tissue. In this case, muscle fibers are placed. Further, these muscle fibers are united in peculiar bundles, which are also surrounded by connective tissue. The muscle fibers themselves are myofibrils. These are the protein elements that enable contraction. Even myofibrils are surrounded by connective tissue. Next, surrounding these myofibrils is the sarcoplasm, and this is the source of energy for the myofibrils themselves. This sarcoplasm contains water, glycogen, as well as mitochondria and ribosomes. This is very important for a general understanding of how muscle fiber is structured to know how to target it more effectively. Now, we move on to the types of muscle fibers. The first one is oxidative fibers. They're also called red fibers or slow fibers. They're also called type 1. Of course, first of all, they will dominate in the lower extremities, that is, in the legs, because we walk a lot with our legs during the day. And there are also a lot of them in the stabilizer muscles, which provide our uprightness and our balance. And these fibers, as I said, are called oxidative fibers. And that's for a reason. They only work when they have access to oxygen. Oxidation occurs in the presence of oxygen. And of course, oxidative fibers are less likely to provide hypertrophy, so they build muscle mass. That's why it's quite different to build up, for example, abs. Of course, to a certain extent, abs hypertrophy exists, but they cannot be hypertrophy to the same volume as, for example, the gluteal muscles, because the abs are oxidative fibers. It's pretty much a stabilizer muscle. The second type of muscle fibers are glycolytic fibers. They're also called white fibers. They're also called type 2 fibers or fast fibers. They work when we're doing strength training. For example, pull-ups, push-ups, or working with barbells and dumbbells. Especially if we do up to 12 reps in a set. That's where the glycolytic ones work. They work in an anaerobic mode without access to oxygen. If oxidative ones with oxygen work in anaerobic mode, these work in anaerobic mode, and they get their energy through glycolysis. And if we take the cross-sectional area of fibers of the first type and the second type, we will see that indeed, fibers of the second type give more volume, about 1.5 times. By the way, this indicator is lower in women. This is why it's more difficult for women to build more muscle mass. So once again, the first type is oxidative fibers, the so-called endurance fibers, simplistically speaking. The second type is fast glycolytic fibers. Simply put, power fibers. If we take an ordinary person who doesn't do sports, he will have approximately the first and the second type equally. Although, of course, the first type will prevail in the legs. And if a person does not gain muscle mass well, then most likely the first type of fibers prevails in him. That is, it will be much better for him to train for endurance. But some people easily build muscle mass, and these are the people who innately genetically have the second type of fibers. They're lucky in that respect. Each type has its use, its pros and cons. In general, it's believed that the number of muscle fibers is given to us by nature and we cannot change them. That is, we can cause hypertrophy, an increase in muscle fibers, but in no way can we affect their absolute number. Now we come to the two types of hypertrophy. Hypertrophy is myofibrillar and sarcoplasmic. Myofibrillar hypertrophy increases myofibrils, while sarcoplasmic increases the number of mitochondria, water, glycogen, and phosphate in our muscle fiber. Myofibrillar is primarily a strength adaptation, while sarcoplasmic primarily affects endurance. What should you do for myofibrillar hypertrophy? The classic approach for gaining muscle mass, we take about 70% of our maximal weight. For example, if in bench press is 100 pounds, we take 70 pounds as a working weight and lift to failure. It will be about 8 to 12 reps. The duration of the approach will be about 30 seconds. In this mode, we achieve greater and more targeted loading and adaptation through myofibrillar hypertrophy. But for sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, the weight is already taken much less and the time under load is also much longer. It's for 1 minute or more. And of course, the number of repetitions will also be higher. For this purpose, it's necessary to choose such a weight which will provide us with fatigue for at least 1 minute and maybe even more. What approach is more rational and expedient? Of course, first of all, it's the classic bodybuilding approach of building muscle mass, working at 70% of the maximum weight and 8 to 12 repetitions. But there is a certain caveat. If, for example, you've reached a plateau, if you have stopped progressing and are no longer growing, and are not adding to your working weights, then in this situation, you need to change the nature of the load. You can try a large number of repetitions where each set lasts at least 1 minute. In general, it is recommended to combine both types of load. You can also alternate them. For example, 1 month we do one type, and another month we do another. Also, some studies show that some muscles respond much better to a load with a high number of repetitions. That is, we load a muscle for 60 seconds, then we rest it for not very long, for example, also for 60 seconds. And then we actively pump it again with a large number of repetitions. Practice shows that the following muscle groups respond better to this type of load: deltoids, biceps, triceps, and quadriceps. So if you have problems with these areas and you want to work on them and find some new approach to move them from the dead center, try this. Let's summarize all of this. How do you build muscle mass and how do you induce hypertrophy? If you've been training for less than 2 years, focus on the classics. But if you've been training for a long time, if your progress has already slowed down a lot, then try switching to sarcoplasm already. This can give you a boost to your growth. And then later on, start alternating between both. There is another approach to alternation. We can train basic multi-joint exercises in a small number of repetitions. And then we can perform isolated exercises in a large number of repetitions with small pauses for rest. And this approach will give you the maximum possible hypertrophy. By the way, write in the comments, how do you train? Do you go to the gym? Do you work out with heavy weights? Or on the contrary, with smaller weights? Or maybe you do another sport. Share. We're interested to hear from you. And now, I highly recommend you to watch my other video, where I talk about the differences between the heart of an athlete and an ordinary person. And the differences, I must say, are very significant and interesting. The link to the video just appeared on the screen, and the link's also in the description. And I pinned it as the top comment. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. We'll see you in the video about the athlete's heart.